Have you ever looked into the eyes of someone you love and seen disappointment staring back at you? I have. It was my own daughter. And then my son. They said I was too much, too slow, too expensive, a burden. They forgot how I used to carry them on my back when their legs were tired. They forgot how I skipped my meals just to make sure they ate. They forgot me. But something happened. One small moment, one unexpected person, a stranger who reminded me of who I used to be. And that was the moment I stopped begging for love and started living for myself again. This is not just a story about money. It is a story about memory, about motherhood, and about a woman who finally said, "Enough." Before we jump back in, tell us where you are tuning in from. And if this story touches your heart, please subscribe, because tomorrow I have saved something truly special just for you. My name is Helen Moore. I am 68 years old. I live in a small town near the coast, where the air smells like salt and pine trees. The mornings are quiet here, the kind of quiet that wraps around you like a soft blanket. Every day, I wake up at 6 o'clock. My knees ache a little, but I'm used to that now. I sit on the edge of my bed for a moment, listening to the birds outside my window. I breathe slowly, in and out. That small moment is mine. No noise. No one asking for anything. I live alone. My husband, Robert, passed away 7 years ago. He was strong, kind, and always believed in me, even when I did not believe in myself. His old flannel jacket still hangs on the coat rack by the door. Sometimes I brush my fingers against it, just to feel close to him. My days are simple. I water the plants. I make tea. I walk to the market on Wednesdays and buy fresh bread from Mr. Thomas. He always saves a loaf for me, even when they are almost sold out. I smile and thank him. He says, "It is no trouble, Miss Evelyn. You are one of the good ones." Sometimes I visit the library. I do not take out books like I used to, but I sit by the window and watch the world go by. I like the silence. There, it feels safe. Every Sunday my daughter Jessica calls. She is busy with her work and her children. I understand that. She always sounds tired. "Hi, Mom," she says quickly. "Just checking in. Everything okay?" I always say yes, even if it is not. I do not want to be a problem. My son, Matthew, calls less. Maybe once every 3 weeks. He is living in the city now. He has big ideas and bigger dreams. "Sorry, Mom. I am just swamped," he says. Swamped means very busy. That is what he tells me. Still, I try to stay useful. I knit socks for the children. I bake cookies when they visit. I send cards on birthdays, always with a little cash inside. They used to come more often. But now, there is always something. A meeting, a school trip, a flat tire. I try not to feel sad about it. I tell myself, they have their own lives. That is how it is supposed to be. But some nights, when the wind howls and the house feels too big, I wonder, did I do something wrong? Did I expect too much? I have friends, of course. There is Linda from church. She always wears bright scarves and laughs too loudly. And Mr. Harris from down the street. He is 92 and still rides his bicycle. He waves at me every morning. But most days, it is just me, my house, my plants, my tea. It is not a bad life. It is quiet, peaceful, predictable. But something inside me, something small and soft, was starting to feel forgotten, like I had done my part, raised my children, buried my husband. And now, I was just waiting for the phone to ring, waiting for someone to need me, waiting to feel alive again. I did not complain. I am not the kind of woman who complains. But I felt it. A heaviness. A question I could not answer. Was this all there was left for me? I brushed it off, like dust from an old chair. I told myself, "You are lucky, Evelyn. You have a roof. You have memories. You have your health." But deep down, I knew something was missing, and I had no idea how much my world was about to change. Not because of my family, not because of something I lost, but because of a stranger, someone I had never met, someone who would remind me who I really was. But that part of the story is still to come. It started with a small comment. One evening, Jessica came to visit with her 2 children. It had been almost a month since I had seen them, so I made their favorite, chicken pot pie and warm apple crumble. I set the table with the good plates, the ones with the little blue flowers around the edge. I even folded the napkins like I used to when they were children. We ate together, though Jessica barely touched her food. She kept glancing at her phone. "Work is so overwhelming," she said, placing her fork down. "Sometimes I wish I had your life, Mom. No pressure. No one to take care of." I smiled politely. But something inside me sank. No one to take care of? Is that what she thought? The children ran off to play, and she began gathering her things. Before leaving, she stood in the hallway, looked at me, and said in a half-joking tone, "You know, maybe it is time you moved into a senior place. You would not have to cook or clean anymore." I laughed, softly, trying not to show my surprise, but my hands tightened around the edge of the kitchen towel. "A senior place? I like my home," I replied gently. "I have my garden, my memories." She nodded, but I could see it in her eyes. She was not really listening. She had already decided something. After she left, I sat in the silence. The pie was still warm. The plates were barely touched. I wrapped up the leftovers and placed them in the fridge. Then I walked to the living room, sat in my old chair, and stared at the empty cups on the coffee table. I tried to shake it off. She meant well, I told myself. She is just tired. But then, Matthew called the next day. He usually called when he needed something. That is how I knew it was him before I even picked up. "Hey, Mom," he said. "Listen, I have been talking with Jess." My heart skipped. "We think maybe it is time to start planning things. For your future. You know, just in case." "In case of what?" I asked quietly. "Well, you know, health, safety, money, that sort of thing. There are a few assisted living places nearby. Nice ones. It would be easier for everyone." Everyone. That word hit me harder than I expected. Easier for everyone. Not better for me. Not kinder. Just easier. I took a breath. I am not ready. To leave my home, I said firmly. He went quiet. Then, with a chuckle, he said, "Come on, Mom. Do not be stubborn." Stubborn. Another word that stayed with me. When we hung up, I just sat there, still, trying to understand what had changed. Why were my children suddenly speaking to me like I was a problem that needed solving? I did not feel old. I baked, I cleaned, I walked to the market, I laughed with friends. But in their eyes, had I become a burden? That night I looked around my house differently. The photo frames, the books, the old clock Robert gave me on our 30th anniversary. Would I have to leave all of this behind someday? I walked to the mirror and looked at myself closely. My hair had more silver than gold now. There were lines around my eyes. But I still knew that woman. I was still me. So why did I feel like I was disappearing in their eyes? That evening, I could not eat. The food sat untouched on the plate. The tea turned cold. Something had shifted. Something had changed in the air between us. I could feel something changing, and I was not sure I was ready for what would come next. The next few days passed slowly. I went through my usual routines, watering the garden, folding laundry, making tea. But everything felt different. It was as if the colors around me had faded. The sunlight was softer. The air felt heavier. Kept thinking about what Jessica and Matthew said. They called it planning for the future. But to me, it felt like they were planning my exit. Had I done something wrong? Was I not kind enough? Was I too quiet? Too old-fashioned? These questions followed me like shadows. I would wash the dishes and suddenly remember the tone of Matthew's voice. Calm, patient, like he was explaining something to a child. I am not a child. I am their mother. I raised them. I worked 2 jobs when they were small. I packed their lunches, washed their clothes, sat by their beds when they had fevers. And now they wanted me out of the way? I tried to ignore the feeling, but it was there each morning. In the way I paused before opening the curtains. In the way I hesitated before calling either of them. One morning, I picked up the phone and started to dial Jessica's number. Then I stopped. What would I even say? "Hi, sweetheart. Do you think I am useless now?" No, I could never ask that. Instead, I sat in silence and listened to the ticking of the old clock. It ticked like a heartbeat. Steady, gentle, familiar. But even that sound made me feel like time was running out. The truth is, I was confused. Not just by what they said, but by how it made me feel. I thought I was strong. I thought I was used to being alone. But hearing those words, being called a burden, it shook something deep inside me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. But I did neither. I just sat, still, quiet. Later that day, Linda from church called. "Evelyn, are you coming to the book club this week?" she asked. I opened my mouth to say yes, but the words would not come. I think I will stay home," I said instead. She paused. "Is everything all right?" I wanted to say no. I wanted to tell her everything. But I could not find the words. "Yes, I am fine," I lied. After I hung up, I felt the tears. They came slowly. not heavy sobs, just quiet drops, like rain against glass. I wiped them away and whispered to myself, "You are not weak. You are just tired." But that was not the truth either. I was not just tired. I was heartbroken, and I did not know why. I wanted to believe it was just a misunderstanding, that they meant well, that they loved me. But the doubt had already planted itself inside my heart, and it was growing. That night, I could not sleep. I lay awake, listening to the wind. The house creaked softly around me, as if it were breathing. I closed my eyes and tried to remember a time when things felt simple, when my children looked at me with love, not pity, when I felt like I belonged. But no matter how hard I tried, I could not find it. The confusion wrapped around me like a thick blanket, and I knew something had to change. But I did not know what. Not yet. A few days later, I went to the post office. I needed some fresh air, and I thought the walk might clear my head. As I stepped inside, I noticed a young man at the counter. He had kind eyes and thick dark hair tucked under a navy blue cap. He smiled politely at the woman in front of him, helping her with her parcels. When it was my turn, he looked up and said, "Good morning, ma'am. How can I help you today?" Something in his voice was kind, not rushed, not forced, just kind. Handed him my envelope and said, "It is just a letter from my friend in Oregon. Nothing urgent." He weighed the envelope, printed the label, and then smiled again. "Do you want a receipt?" I shook my head. "No, thank you." As I turned to leave, he spoke again. "Nice handwriting, by the way. You do not see that much anymore." I paused. I had not expected that. "Oh, thank you. I suppose I have had a lot of practice over the years," I said with a small smile. He nodded. "I always notice the small things. They tell you a lot about people." I walked out feeling lighter. It was such a small moment. Barely a conversation. But for the first time in weeks, I felt seen. The next time I visited the post office, he was there again. "Back already?" he asked with a grin. I smiled. "I had another letter to send. My friend and I like to write to each other. It keeps our minds sharp." "I think that is wonderful," he said. "Most people just send emojis now." That made me laugh. It was the first time I had laughed in days. His name was Thomas. Over the next few weeks, I learned more about him. He lived nearby. He helped take care of his grandmother. He liked jazz music and gardening. He said he often talked to older customers because, in his words, they actually listen. One morning, after dropping off another letter, I stayed a few minutes longer. "Can I ask you something?" I said, feeling nervous. "Of course," he replied. "Do you think people become invisible when they grow older?" He looked at me carefully. Not with pity, not with surprise, just with genuine attention. "No," he said. "I think people stop looking." His answer made my throat tighten. We did not talk about it more, but something passed between us in that moment, a quiet understanding. From that day on, I found myself walking to the post office even when I had no letters to send. Sometimes we spoke only a few words, sometimes we shared stories, and slowly, I began to feel something I had not felt in a long time: trust. Not in the way I used to trust my children or my late husband. This was different. I trusted that when I spoke, Thomas would hear me, not correct me, not question my value, not look past me. He saw me, and in that simple kindness, something inside me began to breathe again. I still had doubts. I still carried sadness, but for the first time in weeks, I also had hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, I was not fading, and maybe not everyone saw me as a burden. A week later, I was sitting by the window with a cup of tea. The garden outside was quiet. The roses I had planted last spring were just beginning to bloom. Soft pink petals opened slowly toward the light, as if they were stretching after a long sleep. I had always found peace in that garden. It was the one place where things still made sense. You plant, you water, you wait, and something beautiful grows. But that morning, even the roses could not calm my thoughts. I kept thinking about the last time Jessica had called. She had not asked how I was feeling. She had not asked what I was doing. She had called to remind me about the form for the senior living community. "It is just information," she had said. "You do not have to decide anything yet." But her voice told a different story. She wanted me to say yes. She wanted to be free of worry. And that hurt more than I could admit. Later that afternoon, I received a call from an old friend. Her name was Marion. We had known each other for over 30 years. She had been with me through the good, the bad, and the confusing. "Evelyn, how are you?" she asked warmly. I smiled. "I am surviving, Marion. How about you?" We spoke for a while, shared small stories, talked about the weather, the kind of conversation that feels ordinary but comforting. Then, just as we were about to say goodbye, she paused. "Evelyn," she said softly, "do you mind if I say something honest?" "Of course not," I said. "You always can." I saw Jessica at the grocery store last week. She was speaking to someone. I could not hear every word, but I heard her say, "We are almost there. Soon I will not have to deal with her care anymore." I froze. Marion waited for my response, but I had none. I felt like the ground beneath me had shifted, as if someone had pulled away the air. "I am sorry," she added gently. I was not going to say anything, but I could not stay quiet, not if there is something going on. Something inside me shattered. I thanked her for calling, told her I needed some time. Then I sat in silence. Was it true? Had Jessica really said that? Had she spoken about me, as if I were some task to complete? I wanted to believe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe Marion had heard wrong. Maybe it was something else. But deep down, I knew. I knew the look in Jessica's eyes lately, the careful way she chose her words, the growing distance in every phone call. And now, I had heard a warning, not from a stranger, not from my fears, but from someone who loved me. Still, my heart refused to accept it fully. Jessica was my daughter. I had held her hand on her first day of school. I had stayed up all night when she was sick. I had saved every birthday card she ever gave me. She could not mean to hurt me. Could she? And if she did, what did that mean about the life I had built? I looked out at the garden again. The roses were still blooming. soft, quiet, beautiful. But even they could not stop the ache in my chest. Because now I knew something had changed, and there was no going back. The next morning I woke up early. The sun had not yet touched the curtains, and the house felt quiet, like it was holding its breath. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. I did not cry. I did not speak. I just sat there, listening to the stillness, the kind of stillness that feels heavy, like it knows something you are trying not to feel. Marian's voice echoed in my mind. Soon I will not have to deal with her care anymore. I wanted to believe it was a mistake, a misunderstanding, a moment taken out of context. So I did what many people do when they are afraid of the truth. I ignored it. I made breakfast. Toast with strawberry jam, just the way I liked it. I even poured a small glass of orange juice and placed a cloth napkin on the table like I used to when the children were little. I told myself, "You are fine. Everything is fine." I swept the kitchen floor. I watered the plants. I answered a few emails. I forced myself to smile when I saw my reflection. But inside, I felt like I was walking across ice. Thin ice. And every step could be the one that cracked it open. Later that day, Jessica called. "Hi, Mom," she said quickly. "I just wanted to check in." Her voice sounded normal, casual, like nothing was wrong. And for a moment, I wanted to believe her. I wanted to pretend I had never heard what Marian said. I wanted to hear my daughter's voice and feel love, not fear. So I matched her tone. "I am doing well," I said. "Thank you for calling." We spoke about her job, the weather, something the neighbor's cat had done, the usual things. Not once did she ask how I really felt. Not once did she mention the conversation Marian overheard. I waited. But the words never came. Before she hung up, she said, "Did you look at that brochure I gave you? The retirement place with the walking trails?" I swallowed hard. "I have not looked at it yet," I replied softly. "I will. Soon," I said, it because I could not bear another argument. I said it because I was tired. But mostly, I said it because I still wanted to believe she loved me in the same way I loved her. After the call, I sat on the porch. The wind was gentle. The sky above me was soft and pale. I told myself I was just being sensitive, that Jessica was stressed, that Marian was mistaken. I told myself that families go through hard times, that things would get better. But deep down, I knew I was trying to build a house out of smoke. I was pretending because the truth hurt too much. Because if I admitted it, if I really saw what was happening, I would have to face something I was not ready for. That maybe my children no longer saw me as a mother. Maybe they only saw me as a problem to solve. And that thought, that was too much to carry. So I folded it up like an old letter and placed it deep in my pocket. And I told myself, again and again, "You are fine. Everything is fine." 3 days later, Thomas came over. He does not visit often, not unless Jessica reminds him. He says he is busy with work, and I try to believe him. But a part of me knows it is not just about time. It is about interest, about effort. Still, I smiled when I saw him at the door. "Hello, Mom," he said, kissing my cheek. He brought a small bag of groceries, mostly canned soup and crackers. Things he probably thought I needed. Things that said, "I care. without having to ask how I was actually doing. "Thank you," I said. "That is kind of you." He shrugged. "No big deal. Just thought you might need some stuff." We sat in the living room for a while. The television was on, but the volume was low. Neither of us watched it. I asked about his job. He gave short answers. I asked about the kids. "Busy with school?" he said. His words were polite. Nothing sharp. Nothing cruel. But something felt different. It was the way he looked at me. Not directly. Not like before. He looked past me. Above. Me, around me. Like I was not quite there. Or maybe like I was there. But not really important. And that stung more than I expected. He used to look at me like I was the one who could fix everything. When he fell from his bike. When he was nervous before a big test. When his heart was broken for the first time. Back then, I was his anchor. But now, he looked at me like I was a fragile glass he was afraid to drop. Like he was already deciding where I should go, what I should do, and how little I should be involved in his life. "Thomas," I said gently, "can I ask you something?" He turned his head, but did not meet my eyes. "Sure, Mom. Do you think I am a burden?" The room went very quiet. He sighed. "Why would you ask that?" I felt my throat tighten. "Because sometimes I feel like I am being handled, not loved." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Mom, it is not like that. We want what is best for you. We want you to be safe." Safe. That word again. That word people use when they want to take away your choices without sounding cruel. "I am still here, Thomas," I said softly. "I am still me." He nodded, but his eyes said something else. They said he had already made up his mind. That he believed I could no longer make decisions for myself. That I was better off somewhere, smaller. "Maybe I should go," he said after a long pause. He stood up quickly. Too quickly. "Thank you for the visit," I said quietly. He gave a weak smile and patted my shoulder, as if I were a pet, not a person. And then he left. I stood at the window and watched him walk to his car. He did not look back. I placed my hand on the glass. Not for warmth, just for balance. Because that day, the way he looked at me changed something inside me. It told me the truth, even if I did not want to hear it. To him, I was not a mother anymore. I was a project, a problem, a task to be managed, and I could not ignore it any longer. The next evening, after dinner, I could not wait any longer. I needed answers. I needed to know what was really happening between me and my children. I waited until the house was quiet. The shadows in the hallway stretched long and thin, and the night air was cool. Jessica had called earlier that afternoon, and I had promised I would think about the retirement community. I told myself I would not bring up the heavy things until the next day. But tonight, I could not wait. I picked up the phone and dialed her number. It rang 3 times before she answered. "Hi, Mom," she said, her voice soft and light. Too light. "Hello, Jessica," I said, trying to sound calm. "I need to ask you something." There was a slight pause on the other end. Then she spoke again. "Sure, Mom. What is it? Do you think I'm a burden? I asked, the words coming out before I could stop them. The silence that followed was thick, so thick. I could hear my own heart beating in my ears. Mom, Jessica finally said, her voice lower now. Why are you asking me that? I felt my chest tighten. Because I feel it. I feel it every time I call, every time I try to talk to you. Every time I ask you about your life, you make it seem like I am in the way. There was another pause, and I could hear the shift in her tone. It was subtle, but it was there. She was not angry. She was not upset. She was avoiding. I just want what is best for you, she said softly. You are getting older, Mom. We want to make sure you are taken care of. That word again, taken care of. I can take care of myself, Jessica, I said quietly, my voice shaking. I just want to know if you still see me as your mother, as the person I have always been. I do see you as my mother, but no, I interrupted. It is not enough to just say it. I need to know if you really see me, not as someone who is old or a problem, but as the woman I am, as the person who raised you. The silence on the other end was longer this time. I could almost hear her breathing, steady and measured. I love you, Mom, she said finally, but the words felt distant. I am just worried. We are all worried. We just want what is best for you. I swallowed hard. I wanted to scream, to cry, to tell her how much I hurt. But I did not. Instead, I said, I know you love me, but sometimes I do not feel loved. I feel like I am just a responsibility. There was no answer. I felt a weight settle in my chest, heavier than it had ever been before. I just need you to tell me the truth, I said quietly. Do you see me as a burden? Yes or no? Her voice cracked slightly as she responded. No, Mom. You are not a burden. But things are changing, and it is hard. I don't know how to handle it. It was the closest thing to honesty I had heard in a long time. But it was still not enough. I wanted more. I needed more. I am not asking for you to fix me, Jessica, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I just want to feel like I matter to you. Not because I need help, but because I am your mother. I know, Mom, she said, but the words felt hollow. I know. I hung up the phone, but the silence that followed was not comforting. It was an echo, a reflection of everything that had been left unsaid. And in that silence, I realized something. The truth had been hanging in the air for a long time, but I had not wanted to see it. I had been too afraid to face it. But now I knew. The distance between us had grown too wide, and I was not sure how to cross it. The hours passed, but the thoughts in my mind did not stop. They kept circling like birds trapped in a storm, round and round, never resting. I could not focus on anything. Every time I tried to read a book, the words blurred together. When I watched the television, the sounds felt distant, like they were happening far away, in another world. And when I looked at the small pictures on the walls, the ones from when the children were young, I saw not their smiles, but the distance. Between us, I could still hear Jessica's voice from our call. I am just worried. We are all worried. Worried. That word echoed too. But it was not the kind of worry that comes from love. It was the worry of obligation, of duty, of something that needed to be managed, something that needed to be fixed. I kept thinking, am I really a burden? Am I just someone to be managed now? I tried to shake it off. I tried to convince myself that I was being too sensitive, that I was overthinking it. But every time I closed my eyes, the images of Jessica and Thomas looking at me with pity, not love, came rushing back. I could feel their eyes on me, the way they glanced at me quickly, as if to make sure I was still there, but not really seeing me. It was the kind of look you give someone you have no connection with anymore, the kind of look that says, I do not know you, and I do not really want to. I could not stop thinking about the way Thomas had looked at me that afternoon, how he had barely met my eyes, how he had left so quickly. He was not the little boy who used to run to me when he scraped his knee, asking me to make it better. He was not the son who once sat with me, telling me about his dreams, his fears. Now he barely had time to talk. And Jessica, she had become a stranger to me too. I heard her words, but I did not feel her warmth. I heard her care, but I did not feel it in my heart. Her voice, though soft, did not touch me like it used to. It was just a phone call, just words, empty words. The ache in my chest grew deeper. I tried to distract myself. I walked to the garden and tended to the flowers. I put on my favorite music, hoping to find comfort in the familiar notes. But nothing worked. My mind kept returning to one question. Why am I feeling this way? It was not just about the phone call or the visit. It was everything. The slow drift. The silent distance that had grown between us all. I asked myself, is this just how it is when your children grow up? Is this the natural order of things? Do they just move on without you? I could not stop thinking about it. I thought of the days when they were little, when I was their world. I thought of the times I stayed up late, helping with homework, cleaning scraped knees, listening to their fears. And then I thought of now, of the polite conversations, the empty promises. I tried not to feel bitter, but it was hard. I felt invisible. Was not sure when it had happened, but somewhere along the way, my children had stopped seeing me as their mother, as the person who knew them best. I had become something else, something they no longer wanted to deal with. The night fell quietly around me, but the thoughts in my mind did not quiet. They kept coming, kept pushing against my mind. I could not stop thinking, and every thought only made me feel more alone. The next few days passed in a blur. I went through the motions. I cooked, I cleaned, I watered the garden. But it felt like I was moving through someone else's life, not my own. Every action felt distant. Every task felt like an obligation I could not escape. I sat on the porch that evening, watching the rain fall softly. The steady rhythm of the raindrops on the roof brought some peace, but not enough. I listened to the sound, hoping it would wash away the ache inside me. But it did not. The pain was quiet. It was not loud or obvious, like the way a wound would hurt if you touched it. It was the kind of pain that sits deep inside you, the kind that grows slowly, unnoticed, until it is impossible to ignore. I thought about what Jessica had said, how she was just worried, but her words, though kind, had felt like they were made from the air. They did not reach me, not the way they should have. I wanted her to tell me that she still saw me, that she still knew me, that I was still important to her. Instead, I heard the soft hum of responsibility in her voice. I heard the careful distance, and it hurt more than I could say. I leaned forward in the chair, my arms wrapped around my knees. I closed my eyes, letting the rain fall over me. Even though I was under the porch roof, I wanted to feel something. Anything. It was in these moments, when the house was still and the world outside was quiet, that the loneliness became unbearable. The silence was louder than anything I had ever heard. It pressed in on me, suffocating me until I could hardly breathe. I thought about Thomas, about his quick visit, his short answers, his need to leave. I thought about the way he barely looked at me when he spoke. I wondered, why does he act like I do not matter anymore? I wanted to ask him. I wanted to shout at him, tell him how much I missed him, how much I missed the boy he used to be. But I did not. I did not have the courage. And in a way, I did not think he would understand. I had raised him. I had given him everything I could. And now he was slipping away, like water between my fingers. The quiet pain was deeper now. It was not just in my chest anymore. It had settled in my bones, in my thoughts, in the very way I moved through the world. I thought about the days when we were close, when he was just a boy, and I was his whole world. I thought about the little hands that once clung to me, about the laughter we shared. Those days felt so distant now, as if they had happened to someone else. I closed my eyes tighter, and then I cried. It was not loud or dramatic. It was the kind of crying that happens when you are alone, when there is no one to see your tears, the kind of crying that is so quiet, it feels like you are crying inside yourself. I let the tears fall freely. I did not try to stop them. I let them carry the weight of all the years, of all the love that had been given and forgotten, of all the moments that had slipped away without anyone noticing. And in that moment, I realized something. The pain was not just about the distance between me and my children. It was not just about the fact that they were growing up and moving on. It was about me. I had spent so much time giving, so much time trying to make everyone else happy, that I had forgotten to take care of myself. I had forgotten to make sure that I was still seen, that I still mattered. I wiped my eyes, took a deep breath, and stood up. The rain was still falling, soft and steady. It was a quiet reminder that life continued, even when it felt like everything was falling apart. I could not change how my children saw me. Not yet. But I could change how I saw myself. And that thought, though small, felt like the beginning of something. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The house was still dark, and the air was cool and quiet. But there was a restlessness inside me, a need to know the truth. I could no longer stay silent, pretending everything was okay. I had tried to push my feelings aside, to ignore the growing distance between us. But the truth was, I could not ignore it anymore. I stood in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection. My face looked tired, but there was something else too. Something I had not seen in a long time. It was strength. Not the strength that comes from being strong for others, but the strength that comes from facing the truth, even when it hurts. Thought about Jessica, about Thomas. I thought about the way they had treated me, the way they spoke to me, and the way they looked at me, like I was just someone they had to take care of. And then I thought about myself. How had I allowed myself to be treated like that? How had I allowed my children to believe I was just something they could manage, something to be fixed? The answer came to me slowly, like a painful realization. I had let it happen because I had been afraid of being alone, afraid of being forgotten, afraid that if I did not give them everything, I would lose them. I had been so focused on them that I had stopped focusing on myself. I had stopped remembering that I was worthy of love, of respect, and of care. I could not keep living like this. Not anymore. I grabbed my phone, dialed Jessica's number, and waited. It rang 3 times before she answered, her voice sounding distracted. "Hello, Mom," she said. I took a deep breath. "Jessica, we need to talk. I cannot keep pretending anymore. I need to know the truth. I need to know where I stand with you." There was a pause, and I could hear her shift on the other end of the line. "What do you mean, Mom?" "I mean, I need to know if you still see me as your mother, if you still love me, or if I am just someone you have to take care of." I heard her take a slow breath. "Mom, that is not what I meant when I said I was worried about you." "But it is how I feel," I said, my voice firmer now. "I feel like I am just a responsibility to you. I do not want to be a burden anymore. I want to know if you still see me for who I am." There was a long silence, longer than I wanted. Finally, Jessica spoke. "I do see you, Mom. I see you for who you are. But I also see that you are getting older, and I worry about you. I don't know how to help you with that." Her words stung. I felt the weight of them, but I did not let it show. "Jessica," I said, my voice soft but steady, "I am not asking you to fix me. I am asking you to see me as I am. Not as someone who needs fixing, not as someone who is fading away." "I do see you, Mom," she repeated. "But," her voice sounded tired, "I just don't know what to do anymore." The words hit me like a cold wind. "You do not need to do anything," I said, my heart heavy. "I just need you to see me, to see that I am still here. And I need you to stop looking at me like I am just a problem to be solved." There was a long pause. I could hear the faint sound of her breathing. "Okay, Mom," she said quietly. "I understand. I will try to see you, not as a burden, but as my mother." I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to process what had just been said. It was not everything I had hoped for. It was not a perfect answer, but it was something. It was the first step toward truth, and it was enough. For now. I thanked her, slowly hung up the phone, and sat down. The pain was still there. The distance was still there. But something had shifted. I had asked for the truth, and I had received it, even if it was not the answer I wanted, and somehow that felt like progress. The days that followed Jessica's call were filled with a quiet tension. I had asked for the truth, and I had received it. But the truth did not bring the relief I had hoped for. It was like opening a door only to find an empty room. I spent hours thinking about our conversation. Jessica had said she saw me, but I still felt unseen. I still felt like I was fading away, like I was just another part of the background in their busy lives. But as I sat in the quiet of my home, I began to understand something. I had spent so much time looking for their approval, their attention, that I had forgotten to look at myself. I had forgotten to see myself for who I was, strong, independent, and capable of living my own life, regardless of what others thought. I had been waiting for them to see me, but the truth was, I needed to see myself first. The realization hit me slowly, like the first rays of sunlight breaking through the clouds after a storm. I had been giving everything to my children, to my family, but I had neglected the most important person, me. I thought back to the times when I had felt strong, when I had been proud of who I was, before I had become so consumed with the idea of being needed by others. I had been someone once, someone who was more than just a caretaker. I had been a person with dreams, with desires, with a life outside of my family's needs. I had forgotten that woman. But now, I began to remember her. I spent the next few days reflecting on my life, on the things I had done, the things I had accomplished, and the strength I had shown over the years. I had built a life. I had raised children, worked hard, loved deeply, and though I had been pushed aside, I had never stopped being that woman. She was still inside me. I began to make small changes. I started taking walks in the morning, enjoying the quiet of the world before it became busy. I spent time doing things I loved, like reading books I had always wanted to read but never had the time for. I reconnected with old friends, people who had known me before I became just mom. It was not easy. There were still moments when I felt the sting of loneliness, when I missed the closeness I once had with my children. But the more I focused on myself, the less their absence seemed to matter. I realized that I did not need their approval to feel whole. I did not need their attention to know that I was still a person of value. I was enough, just as I was. And, in that quiet understanding, I found peace. I finally understood that I had been looking for my worth in the wrong places. I had been waiting for someone else to see me. But the truth was, I needed to see myself first. I walked away from the pain, but it was not as simple as just leaving. No, it was not an easy decision. It never is when your heart is tangled in memories, and the people you love are still a part of your life, even from a distance. But as the days passed, I found that the more I focused on myself, the more I realized how much I had allowed myself to be defined by my relationships. I had let my children's approval shape my sense of self-worth. I had allowed their opinions and actions to dictate how I saw myself. And now, I needed to step away from that. I was not leaving them behind, but I was leaving behind the person I had become in their eyes. I was walking away from the idea that I needed to be everything to everyone. I was walking away from the guilt, from the constant feeling that I was never enough. I started by taking a step back in my interactions with them. I stopped trying so hard to please them. I stopped going out of my way to make them happy at the expense of my own happiness. The first time I did it, I felt a pang of guilt. Thomas called to ask for a favor, and I said no. It was not a big thing, just a small request. But for the first time, I stood firm in my decision. I did not apologize. I did not make excuses. I simply said, "No, I cannot do that right now." And it felt good. It felt freeing. It was small, but it was a start. The next time Jessica needed me to watch the kids, I hesitated. I knew she was busy, and I wanted to help. But I also knew that I needed time for myself. So, I told her the truth. I am sorry, Jessica, but I need some time to myself. There was silence on the other end of the line. I could hear her trying to figure out what I meant. And then she said, "Okay, Mom, I understand." It was not an easy thing to do, but it was the right thing. As I walked away from the role I had always played in their lives, I started to feel something I had not felt in a long time: freedom. It was not the kind of freedom that comes from being alone. No, it was the freedom that comes from knowing you are not defined by the expectations of others. The freedom that comes from knowing you are enough, just as you are. I spent time doing things I had forgotten about, things that brought me joy, things that made me feel alive again. I went for long walks in the park. I spent hours painting, again, something I had loved to do when I was younger. I started reading books that I had put down years ago, not because I did not enjoy them, but because I had always been too busy with other people's needs. And slowly, bit by bit, I started to feel like myself again. It was not an overnight change. There were moments when I missed my children, when I felt the sting of their distance. But every time I started to feel the old sadness creeping in, I reminded myself that I had made the right decision. I was walking away from a version of myself that had been hidden for too long. And every step I took away from that version of me was a step closer to reclaiming the woman I had once been. I had walked away, yes, but I had not left the pain behind. That was something I was learning. You cannot walk away from everything at once. Pain has a way of following you, of lingering in the corners of your mind, even when you try to move forward. It was not that I regretted my decision. I knew deep down it was the right one, but that did not mean it was easy. There were days when the weight of my choices felt heavier than I had expected. I spent one evening alone in my living room, sitting in the chair by the window, staring out at the fading light of dusk. It was quiet, but that quiet was a constant reminder of the distance that had grown between my family and me. I could feel the absence of their voices, the absence of their needs. The silence was louder than anything. The pain stayed with me in small ways. It was the way the house felt empty, without the hum of daily conversation, without the sound of footsteps echoing through the hall. It was the way my phone never buzzed with the kind of messages I used to get. It was the moments when I thought of Jessica, or Thomas, or even my grandchildren, and wondered if they thought of me at all. And yet, there was something in that pain, something that told me it was not the end. It was not the kind of pain that would destroy me. It was a reminder that I was still alive, still feeling, still learning. There were times when I wished I could just forget it all. Forget the hurt, forget the disappointment, forget the distance. I wanted to escape from it, but I knew that escaping would not help me heal. I could not move forward without facing the feelings I had been running from for so long. I decided to let the pain stay, but I did not let it control me. I accepted that it would be there, like an old friend that you cannot push away, no matter how hard you try. And slowly, I began to understand that there was no shame in that. Pain was a part of life. It was something we all carried, in different ways, at different times. The next few days felt like I was walking a fine line between moving forward and staying stuck in the past. I spent a lot of time reflecting, thinking about the moments that had shaped my life, both the good and the bad. I began to see patterns, things I had never noticed before. For so many years, I had believed that I needed to give everything of myself to others, to my children, to my family, that my own needs were secondary. But now, I realized that this had been a lie. I had been giving so much of myself, trying to be everything to everyone, that I had forgotten what it meant to be just me. It was hard to admit that. It was hard to face the reality that I had been living for everyone but myself. And yet, in that moment, I realized something else. It was okay to start living for me. It was okay to set boundaries. It was okay to say no, to take time for myself without feeling guilty. I knew it would take time to heal, to move past the pain. But the more I allowed myself to feel, the more I realized that healing was not about running away from the pain. It was about living with it, accepting it, and finding a way to move forward despite it. That evening, as the sun finally dipped below the horizon, I felt a shift inside me. It was small, but it was there. I had let the pain stay, but I had not let it define me. I was more than my hurt, more than my disappointments, and more than the roles others had assigned to me. I could still be strong. I could still be whole. And that was enough for now. There are moments when the past feels so close, so tangible, that I could reach out and touch it. It is a strange sensation, like a thread connecting me to a time when life was simpler, when I was younger, and the world seemed full of possibility. Miss the days when my children were small and everything seemed right. I miss the way their laughter would fill the house, the way they would run to me with their arms wide open after a long day. Those were the days when I felt needed, when I felt like I had purpose. I could hear their voices in my head now, their giggles, their cries, their requests. They used to rely on me for everything, and in those moments, I felt like I was enough. I was their world, and in return, they were mine. But time moves on, and with it, everything changes. My children grew up as they were supposed to. They became independent, found their own lives. And slowly, I began to fade into the background. It is a natural progression, I know, but that does not make it easier to accept. There were times when I would sit alone in the evenings, staring at the old family, photos on the walls. I would look at the pictures of my children when they were young, those days when I was their whole world, and I would remember how I used to feel, how alive I felt in those moments. I miss the way we were, but those days are gone now. My children have their own families, their own lives, and I am no longer the center of their world. I had spent so many years shaping my identity around them, around being their mother, that I had forgotten who I was outside of that role. I still see glimpses of the past, flashes of memories that catch me off guard. I remember the mornings when we would have breakfast together, the way the sunlight would filter through the window, casting a warm glow over the table. I remember the way my children would sit at the table, talking about their day ahead, and how I would listen, offering advice or simply sharing a laugh. But now, those mornings are gone. Now, the silence fills the house in a way I never thought it would. I have tried to fill that space with new things, new routines, new activities, new hobbies. But there is always this quiet ache in my chest, a longing for the past, for the days when I felt seen, when I felt like I mattered. Not just as a mother, but as a person in my own right. Sometimes when the ache feels too much, I close my eyes and try to remember the feeling of being needed. I remind myself that it is okay to miss those times. It is okay to feel the loss. But even in that sadness, I also know that I cannot live in the past forever. I cannot keep wishing for the way things used to be. The past is gone, and as painful as it is to admit, it is not coming back. And so, I take a deep breath and remind myself that the past does not define me. It shaped me, yes, but it does not determine my future. The future is still unknown, still full of possibilities. I may miss the past, but I also know that I cannot let it hold me back. I have learned to let go, slowly, one step at a time. And in that letting go, I begin to make room for new things. Things I had forgotten about in the years I spent focused on everyone else. I still miss the past, but I am learning that there is a life ahead of me, even if it looks different from the one I imagined. There are some things that only a friend can help you see. You can try to figure it out on your own, but sometimes it takes another person to offer a different perspective, to help you see that you are not as alone as you might feel. That afternoon, I decided to call Rachel. We had been friends for years, though we had drifted apart a little as our lives had changed. But today, I felt the need to talk to someone who understood me, someone who knew what it was like to be a mother, a woman, a person trying to figure out who she was in the midst of everything falling apart. Rachel answered on the second ring. Her voice, always warm, was a comfort. "Helen, it's been so long," she said with a smile in her voice. "What's going on?" I paused for a moment, unsure of how to begin. There were so many emotions swirling inside me, so many things I had not said out loud. But as I took a deep breath, I felt something inside me shift, as if I were ready to share. "I need to talk," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "I feel lost, Rachel. I feel like I have lost myself." Rachel's voice softened. "I know you've been going through a lot, Helen, but you're not lost. You're just changing. The word felt strange, but also right. I had been so focused on what I had lost, my connection with my children, the role I had played in their lives, that I had not considered that I might be changing for the better. "I do not know who I am anymore," I continued, the words spilling out now. "I spent so many years being their mother, doing everything for them, that I forgot about me. I feel like I have no purpose now. I don't know what to do with myself." Rachel was quiet for a moment, and I could hear her thinking. "Helen," she finally said, "I know it's hard. But you have to remember that you are not just their mother. You are Helen. You are someone who has lived, who has learned, who has been strong even when things were difficult." I felt a lump in my throat. I had never truly heard myself described that way, not in so many words. It was as if Rachel was helping me remember the parts of myself I had forgotten. You are more than the role you played for your children. You have your own life, your own story. You always did, even when you were raising them. It's not too late to find that again. Her words hit me deeply. I had been so focused on the things I had lost, on what I no longer had, that I had failed to see the potential of what could still be. I just do not know where to begin, I confessed. You begin with yourself, Rachel said firmly. Start by doing something for you, something small, something just for your own joy. You deserve that, Helen. Her words echoed in my mind long after the call ended. I sat there holding the phone in my hand, feeling a new sense of clarity. I had been waiting for something to change, waiting for my children to return to me, for things to go back to the way they were. But I realized now that waiting would not help me. I needed to change too, and so I made a decision. I would start by finding joy again, by remembering the things that made me feel alive before I became consumed with the needs of others. I would start with small steps, perhaps something simple, like taking a walk every day or reading a book I had been meaning to pick up for months. I could not change the past. I could not make my children need me the way they once did. But I could change how I saw myself. I could rediscover the parts of me that had been hidden for so long. And that was a beginning. Goodbyes are never easy. They are often filled with a mixture of emotions: sadness, relief, and sometimes even guilt. And when you are saying goodbye to something that has shaped your entire identity, something that has defined you for years, it can feel like you are leaving a part of yourself behind. I had always thought that my goodbye would come when my children grew up and moved away, when they no longer needed me in the same way. But in truth, I had already said goodbye to that version of myself long before the empty nest became a reality. The goodbye I was facing now was different. It was not just about letting go of the past. It was about letting go of the way I had defined myself for so long. Over the past few weeks, I had been going through my things, sorting through old photos, letters, and keepsakes. I had been holding onto these things, not because they brought me joy, but because they were reminders of who I used to be. They were pieces of a life I had once lived, a life that seemed so far away now. But as I held on to them, I realized that I was not just holding on to memories. I was holding on to a version of myself that no longer existed. It was time to say goodbye to that version of me. I had spent so many years defining myself through the roles I played, mother, wife, caretaker, that I had lost sight of who I was outside of those roles. And now, it was time to let go of that image of myself. I stood in front of the old photo album, my fingers tracing the faces of my children, my husband, my younger self. I could feel the weight of the memories, but I could also feel the weight of something else, the sense of freedom that comes with letting go. I had spent so much time trying to hold on to the past, trying to keep things the way they were, that I had forgotten that change is a natural part of life. The past had shaped me, yes, but it did not define me anymore. It was time to say goodbye to the woman I used to be, to the mother who had lived for her children, to the woman who had given everything of herself to others. And as I said goodbye to that version of myself, I realized that I was not losing anything. I was simply making space for the woman I was becoming. I placed the photo album back on the shelf and turned away from it. There was no need to hold on to it anymore. I had the memories in my heart, and that was enough. Saying goodbye was not about forgetting. It was about releasing. It was about recognizing that I could still carry the lessons of the past with me, but I no longer had to live in it. The future, with all its uncertainty and possibility, was waiting for me. And so, I made peace with it. I made peace with saying goodbye, with letting go, and with the freedom that came with it. As I closed the door on that chapter of my life, I felt lighter. The weight that had been pressing on my shoulders for so long seemed to lift, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I could breathe. There is a certain kind of solitude that settles in when you are truly alone. It is not just about physical space. It is about the quiet that fills your mind, the emptiness that lingers in the corners of your life. And yet, there is something strangely peaceful about it too. For the first time in years, I found myself alone. My children were busy with their own lives. My husband was no longer around, and I had no one to take care of or to worry about. I was free in a way, but it was a freedom I had not expected. I had spent so much of my life caring for others that the silence felt foreign. At first, I did not know what to do with it. I would wake up in the morning and find myself unsure of where to go, what to do, or how to fill my day. The house, once filled with noise and activity, felt empty. I would wander through the rooms, finding little reminders of the past, the children's old toys, pictures of family vacations, my husband's old books. It was as though the house was holding onto its memories, and I was left to sift through them. And yet, in this solitude, I began to discover something new. I began to hear my own thoughts more clearly, to listen to the quiet whispers of my heart. For so long, I had been caught up in the demands of others, in the expectations of family and friends, that I had forgotten what it was like to just be with myself. There were moments when the silence felt heavy, when I longed for someone to share my thoughts with, to fill the space with conversation or laughter. But there were also moments when I found comfort in the stillness. I could sit in a room and simply be. I did not need to entertain anyone or meet anyone's expectations. I could just exist. The quiet gave me time to think, to reflect on my life, and to consider the things I had never allowed myself to consider before. What did I want now? What kind of person did I want to be in this next chapter of my life? I had spent so many years being defined by the roles I played. But now, I was not someone's mother, someone's wife, someone's caretaker. I was just me. And as much as that thought scared me, it also filled me with a sense of possibility. In the silence, I began to hear the sound of my own voice. Not the voice of a mother or a wife, but the voice of a woman who had lived, who had experienced both joy and sorrow, and who was still here, still standing. I am alone now. Yes, but I am not lost. Being alone does not mean I am empty. It does not mean I have nothing to offer or no purpose. It means I have space to find myself again, to rebuild, and to discover who I am beyond the labels and the expectations. In this quiet, I began to rediscover the things I loved. I found joy in simple moments, walking through the park, reading a book, cooking a meal just for myself. I began to realize that I did not need others to fill my life with meaning. I could do that on my own. And though the loneliness still crept in at times, I realized that it was not something to fear. It was simply part of the journey. It was part of finding peace with myself, of learning to be content with my own company. I am alone now, but I am not afraid. In the solitude, I began to hear the soft whispers of strength growing inside me. I was alone, yes, but I was also whole. It is strange, the way time changes you. You go through life, day by day, feeling like you are the same person you have always been, until one day you wake up and realize that you are not. It is not a dramatic shift, but more of a quiet transformation. It happens slowly, almost without you noticing it, until you reach a point where you look at yourself and wonder, who am I now? For me, that moment came in the middle of a simple afternoon. I had been sitting in the living room, sipping a cup of tea and staring out the window when it hit me. I had changed. I was not the same person I had been a year ago, or even a few months ago. I was different, in ways I had not expected, and for the first time, I could see that difference clearly. I could feel it in the way I held myself now. There was a quiet confidence that had settled into my bones, something that had been absent for so long. I walked taller, spoke with more certainty, and for the first time in years, I felt comfortable in my own skin. I had shed the layers of self-doubt and guilt that had weighed me down for so long. I was not the woman who had spent every waking moment trying to please others. I was not the woman who had defined herself solely by her roles as mother, wife, or caregiver. I was not the woman who had felt invisible or unworthy. I was becoming someone new. A woman who had lived, who had experienced both pain and joy, and who had come through it all with a deeper understanding of herself. It was not an easy journey. There were still days when I felt the weight of the past pressing against me, when the loneliness crept in and I wondered if I had made the right choices. But those days were becoming fewer. The more I embraced who I was becoming, the more the doubts faded away. I began to realize that I had been holding myself back, not because I was incapable, but because I had been afraid. I had been afraid of stepping into the unknown, afraid of what it would mean to live for myself and not for others. I had been afraid of change, of losing the person I had been. But now, I could see that change was not something to fear. It was something to embrace. I was not the same, and that was okay. In fact, it was more than okay. It was necessary. I had spent so much time living for others, defining myself through their needs and expectations. But now, I was beginning to see that I had a life of my own to live. And that life could be whatever I wanted it to be. I was stronger than I had realized. I was more capable than I had given myself credit for. And most importantly, I was worthy of the same love and respect that I had always given to others. In that moment, I realized that I was not just surviving anymore. I was thriving. And as I sat there, looking out the window, I allowed myself to smile. Not because everything was perfect, but because I had finally found my own strength. I had finally become the woman I was always meant to be. Sometimes, it is the smallest moments that hold the most meaning. It is easy to think that change, growth, or healing happens in big dramatic events, but in reality, it is the quiet, everyday moments that make the most difference. They are the moments when you can feel a flicker of something new, something good, quietly shining through the cracks of the old life you once knew. I had spent so much time focused on the big picture, on the pain, the loss, the years of feeling invisible, that I had almost forgotten how to notice the small things. But as I spent more time alone, more time with myself, I began to notice them again, a bird singing outside my window, the soft warmth of the sun on my face, the peace that came with a cup of tea in the morning. These moments were like tiny lights, breaking through the darkness, reminding me that there was still beauty in the world. They were small, yes, but they were powerful. And slowly, they began to fill me with a sense of hope I had almost forgotten. It started one afternoon when I was out for a walk in the park. The air was crisp and the sky was clear. The kind of day that makes you feel alive in a way that is hard to explain. I had been walking for a while, lost in my thoughts, when I spotted a child playing with a ball. She was running, laughing, and for a brief moment, I caught a glimpse of her pure joy. It was a reminder that happiness could be found in the simplest of things. I smiled to myself, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a small spark of something inside me. It was a reminder that life could still be light, even after everything I had been through. The pain, the heartache, the loneliness, it was all still there. But so was this moment of joy, and somehow, it was enough. Later that day, I found myself in the kitchen, preparing a simple meal. The process was slow, methodical, and calming. As I stirred the pot, I thought about how far I had come, about the strength I had found in myself. I was not where I wanted to be, not yet, but I was no longer lost. I could feel the small light of hope glowing inside me, growing stronger with each passing day. That night, as I sat down to eat my meal, I realized that I had not felt this peaceful in a long time. I was alone, yes, but it no longer felt like a burden. It felt like freedom. The world was still full of challenges, but I was learning to meet them with a sense of calm, with a quiet strength I had not known I had. It was in that moment that I truly understood something important. Healing does not always come in grand gestures or sweeping changes. Sometimes it comes in the form of small, quiet moments that remind you that even in the darkest times, there is still light. And even though the light was small, it was enough. It was enough to show me that I had the power to keep going, that I had the strength to keep moving forward, one step at a time. There is something deeply humbling about starting over. It is not an easy thing to do, especially when you have spent so many years living a certain way, following a set of routines, and defining yourself by roles that others expect of you. But when the old life falls away, when you are left with nothing but yourself, you are forced to find new beginnings. And sometimes these beginnings are the very things that help you rediscover who you truly are. I had never imagined that I would be starting over at this point in my life. I had always thought that I would grow old, surrounded by family, content in the life I had built. But that was not the reality I faced now. My children were busy with their own lives, and the marriage I had once cherished had long since ended. I was alone. But in that solitude, I realized something important. It was time to begin again. It was a slow process, like the first steps of a long journey. I did not rush it. There were no grand plans or drastic changes. I simply allowed myself to take small steps, one at a time. I began with little things, waking up earlier, taking better care of myself, going for walks in the morning. It was not much, but it was a start. I began to rearrange my space. I moved the furniture around in the living room, created a new corner for reading, and added some plants to brighten up the place. It felt like a small change, but it made a big difference. For the first time in a long while, my home felt like it belonged to me. It was no longer a place filled with memories of the past. It was a space for the future. I also began to explore new hobbies, things I had always wanted to do, but never had the time for. I signed up for an art class, something I had always been interested in but had never pursued. I spent hours painting, losing myself in the colors and the brushstrokes. It was therapeutic, and it reminded me that I still had a lot to offer the world, even if I had spent years believing otherwise. The more I allowed myself to embrace these small changes, the more I began to feel a sense of renewal. I had spent so long focusing on what I had lost that I had forgotten to look at what I still had. The strength to begin again, the courage to try something new, and the knowledge that I was not defined by the past. I was learning to live for myself, not for others. I was beginning to understand that I could create my own happiness, that I did not need permission from anyone else to feel worthy or valuable. And with each passing day, I felt a little lighter, a little more at peace with myself. It was not a perfect journey. There were days when the loneliness crept in again, when I wondered if I was doing the right thing. But those moments were becoming fewer and farther between. The more I embraced this new beginning, the more I realized that I was exactly where I was meant to be. I had been through so much, and yet I was still here. I was still standing, and that, in itself, was a victory. Starting over was not easy, but it was necessary. It was my chance to create the life I had always dreamed of, to rebuild from the ground up. And though I did not know exactly what the future held, I knew one thing for sure. I was ready to face it. It is funny how life has a way of testing you, just when you think you are finally moving forward. I had begun to find my peace, my sense of self again. The days were becoming more manageable, filled with moments of quiet joy, and I had started to feel like the woman I was always meant to be. The past was no longer an anchor weighing me down, and for the first time in a long time, I was in control of my own destiny. But then, as if to challenge everything I had worked so hard to build, he came back. It started with a phone call. His name appeared on the screen, and for a moment, I froze. My heart skipped a beat, and I found myself staring at the phone as if it might be a dream. I had not spoken to him in months. We had both gone our separate ways, and I thought that was the end of it. But there he was, trying to reach me, trying to pull me back into a life I had left behind. I hesitated. The old patterns, the old feelings, came rushing back, like a flood of memories that I had tried so hard to move past. I remembered the way he used to look at me, the promises he had made, the way I had always believed that things would get better if I just held on a little longer. But now, after everything I had gone through, I knew better. I knew that I could not go back to that place, no matter how much it pulled at me. I took a deep breath before answering. His voice on the other end was softer than I remembered, laced with regret. He apologized for everything, for the hurt, for the neglect, for the way he had taken me for granted. He said he had changed, that he had learned from his mistakes, and that he wanted to make things right. It was tempting, I will admit. There was a part of me that wanted to believe him, to let the familiar comfort of the past wash over me again. But I had learned too much over the past few months. I had learned that I was worthy of more than empty promises and fleeting apologies. I had learned that I could not place my happiness in someone else's hands, no matter how much I once loved them. I listened to him speak, but inside I knew the truth. He was not the man I needed him to be. And more importantly, I was not the woman I had been before. I had grown. I had changed. And I could not let the past drag me back into a cycle that would only hurt me again. I ended the conversation gently, but firmly. I told him that I was not ready to reopen that chapter of my life. I explained that I had found peace on my own, and that I was not interested in revisiting old wounds. He seemed to understand, but I could hear the disappointment in his voice. Still, I stood firm. I had learned, after all, that I could not depend on anyone else for my happiness. I could not allow someone from my past to pull me backward when I had fought so hard to move forward. The woman I was becoming was not someone who would settle for the crumbs of a broken relationship. As I hung up the phone, I felt a strange sense of relief. It was not easy to let go, not easy to close that door for good. But I had done it. I had made a choice to prioritize myself, my growth, my peace. He had tried to come back, but I had learned that the best way to move forward was to leave the past where it belonged, behind me. When you walk through fire, you come out with scars. Yes, but those scars are not marks of weakness. They are symbols of strength. I had spent so many years thinking that I was broken, that I had lost myself somewhere along the way. I believed that the woman I used to be was the woman I could never get back. But now, I knew better. I had changed. I could feel it in the way I held myself, the way I moved through the world. There was a quiet confidence in me now, a sense of peace that had not been there before. The woman I had been, vulnerable, afraid, dependent, was still a part of me, but she was no longer the dominant force in my life. I had grown. I had healed. And I was finally learning how to stand on my own 2 feet. When he called, I could feel the old pull, the temptation to return to the familiar, to the version of myself that I had been when I was with him. But that was not who I was anymore. The woman I had become was strong, independent, and no longer willing to sacrifice her happiness for someone else's. I had learned the hard way that I was worthy of love, respect, and care. And those things could not be bargained for. They had to be given freely, or they had no value. I looked at myself in the mirror one evening, really looked at myself. There were lines around my eyes, silver strands of hair that had begun to appear, and a softness to my face that spoke of years of experience. But in my eyes, I saw something new, a clarity, a fire. I was no longer defined by my past or by the expectations others had placed on me. I was a woman who had survived, who had found her way out of the darkness, and who was learning to embrace the light, even if it came in small, quiet moments. I had spent so much time waiting for others to tell me I was worthy, that I was good enough, that I was lovable. But now, I knew that I did not need anyone else's approval. I could give that to myself. I was the one who had the power to decide who I was and what I deserved. And I had decided that I was worth more than the hurt I had allowed myself to accept in the past. I was different now. I had learned to listen to my own voice, to trust my own instincts, and to choose my own happiness. The road had not been easy, and there were times when I questioned whether I could keep going. But each step forward, no matter how small, had brought me closer to the woman I was becoming. And with each step, I felt more certain of who I was and who I was not. I was no longer afraid to be alone. In fact, I had begun to enjoy it. I had come to appreciate the quiet, the stillness, the opportunity to truly connect with myself. It was in those moments of solitude that I found my strength. I had learned that being alone did not mean being lonely. It meant being free. Free to discover the parts of myself that I had lost along the way. There was a certain power in embracing your own company, in knowing that you could stand tall on your own. I had once feared that I would always need someone else to complete me, to make me feel whole. But now, I knew that I was already complete. I was already whole. And as I moved forward into this new chapter of my life, I did so with a sense of pride, not in spite of my past, but because of it. I had survived it all, and now I was stronger than I had ever been before. There comes a moment in every person's life when they must make a choice that changes everything. For so many years, I had been the one who put others first. I had been the one who sacrificed my own needs, my own desires, my own happiness, for the sake of my family, for the sake of others. I had been the caretaker, the giver, the one who always tried to please. It was a role I had worn so well that I did not even realize how much it had taken from me. But now, something had shifted. I had changed, and so had my perspective. I had learned painfully that I could not give from an empty cup. I could not continue to pour myself out for others without first filling myself up. And so, the decision I made one quiet evening was simple, yet monumental. I chose myself. It was not a selfish decision, as some might have thought. It was not about abandoning my family or walking away from my responsibilities. It was about recognizing my own worth, about realizing that I too deserved love, care, and attention. I deserved to put myself first, to prioritize my own needs and happiness, without guilt or shame. For so long, I had carried the weight of everyone else's expectations. I had lived according to the wishes of others, always afraid of disappointing, always afraid of being seen as selfish. But now, I understood that I was allowed to take up space in this world. I was allowed to live for myself, to make choices that were good for me, even if they did not always align with what others expected. Choosing myself meant letting go of the fear that had held me back for so long. It meant trusting that I was worthy of the life I wanted to create, and that I did not need anyone's approval to live it. It meant embracing the idea that I was enough, just as I was, without needing to constantly prove my value to others. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. It was as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders, and I could finally breathe. I did not have to carry the burden of everyone else's needs anymore. I could focus on my own dreams, my own growth, my own happiness. And in doing so, I realized that I was not abandoning anyone. I was giving them the best version of myself, the woman who was whole, who was at peace, who was capable of truly loving others because she loved herself. Choosing myself was not easy. There were moments when I doubted my decision, when I questioned if I was being selfish or if I was letting others down. But every time I felt that doubt creep in, I reminded myself that this was not about hurting anyone. It was about healing myself, about reclaiming my life and my power. I took small steps in this new direction. I spent more time doing things that brought me joy, reading, painting, taking walks in the park, enjoying the quiet moments of solitude. I reconnected with old friends, people who had always been there but whom I had neglected in the busyness of my life. I began to pursue passions that had been pushed aside for years, things that made me feel alive and excited. As I focused more on myself, I realized that the world did not fall apart because I chose to take care of me. In fact, it became a better place, not just for me, but for everyone around me. I was no longer resentful or burned out. I was not bitter. Instead, I was full of energy, compassion, and love. I had found a balance, a harmony, that I had never known before. Choosing myself did not mean I had turned my back on the people I loved. It simply meant that I had stopped sacrificing my own well-being for their happiness. I could now love them fully, but only because I loved myself first. And that was the greatest gift I could give to anyone. It was a small, quiet revolution, but it was my revolution. And in that moment, I knew I had done something truly powerful. I had chosen to live for myself, to honor my own heart and soul. I had chosen myself, and that, above all else, was the most important decision I could ever make. The sun rose a little differently that morning, as if the world itself had decided to greet me with a new beginning. It was not a dramatic change, not something that could be seen in the sky or felt in the air. But for me, it was as if everything had shifted, even if only in the quiet corners of my heart. I had always believed that change came with grand gestures, with loud, life-altering moments. But now, I realized that sometimes change is more subtle, more gradual. Sometimes it is found in the soft moments, in the quiet decisions that you make for yourself. And that is exactly what had happened to me. The woman I had once been, fearful, unsure, and constantly sacrificing for others, was no longer who I was. She had slowly faded into the past, replaced by someone who was strong, confident, and, most importantly, at peace. The choice I had made to prioritize myself had not been easy, but it had been the right one. And in that decision, I had found a sense of freedom that I had not known in years. As I sat by the window, sipping my coffee and watching the light spill into the room, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. I was not where I had expected to be, and yet I was exactly where I needed to be. I had walked through the storm, and now I was standing in the calm. I had survived the pain, the heartache, the confusion, and now I was stronger for it. In the past, I had let others define me, shape me, mold me into something that I was not. But now, I knew that I was the only one who had the power to define my life. I had found my voice, my strength, and my peace, and nothing or no one could take that away from me. The past few months had been a journey of self-discovery, and though I still had much to learn, I knew that I had come a long way. I no longer feared what the future held. I no longer worried about what others thought of me. I had stopped looking for validation outside of myself, and in doing so, I had found a deep, unshakable sense of worth within. I had learned that life is not about avoiding pain or seeking constant happiness. It is about embracing the full spectrum of human experience, both the joys and the sorrows, and finding meaning in it all. It is about finding peace in yourself, even when the world around you is uncertain. And it is about trusting that, no matter what happens, you have the strength to face it. As the day unfolded, I allowed myself to feel everything: the warmth of the sun on my skin, the quiet hum of life all around me, the simple pleasure of breathing in the present moment. It was not a perfect day. There were still challenges ahead, still moments of doubt and fear. But for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face whatever came my way. There was no need for grand plans or big decisions right now. All that mattered was that I was here, in this moment, living my life on my own terms. I was no longer a woman defined by her past or her mistakes. I was a woman who had chosen herself, a woman who was learning to embrace the beauty of each new day. And as the day stretched on, I smiled, not because I had forgotten my past, but because I had survived it. I had made it through the storm, and now I was free. I was free to live, free to love, free to be myself. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. There are moments in life when you realize that gratitude is the key to moving forward. It is not just about thanking others. It is about recognizing the things you have learned, the growth you have experienced, and the strength you have discovered within yourself. It is about acknowledging the journey that has brought you here, with all its pain and joy, its twists and turns, and saying, "Thank you." As I sat in my quiet space, I reflected on everything that had brought me to this point. There were times when I had wished things had been different, times when I had longed for an easier path, for less heartache. But now, as I looked back, I saw something I had never seen before. How each experience had shaped me, had taught me something invaluable. The mistakes I had made, the people I had trusted and lost, the days I had spent feeling small and insignificant. Those moments had all been part of the tapestry of my life, and now I could see the beauty in that tapestry. Not because it was perfect, but because it was mine. It was the story of a woman who had fallen, but had always gotten back up. It was the story of a woman who had loved deeply, had been hurt, but had found her way to healing. I had spent so many years focusing on the things I lacked, the things I had not achieved, the dreams I had not realized. But now, I realized that it was not what I did not have that mattered. It was what I had gained: wisdom, resilience, and a deeper understanding of myself. I had learned to forgive others, yes. But the most important thing I had learned was to forgive myself. I had held on to guilt and regret for far too long, believing that I was somehow responsible for every failure, every disappointment. But now, I could finally release that weight. I could finally let go of the shame and embrace who I was, flaws and all. And so, I said thank you to the lessons, to the pain, to the people who had come into my life and left. I said thank you to the woman I had been, the woman I was, and the woman I was becoming. I said thank you to the strength that had carried me through even when I did not believe I had any left. I said thank you to the quiet moments of peace, to the joy that now filled my heart, and to the future that lay ahead, uncertain but full of possibilities. I said thank you, not because everything had been easy, but because everything had been worth it. I had walked through fire, and while I may still bear the scars, I now saw them as symbols of my growth, not my weakness. I had been broken, but I was whole again. I had lost my way, but I had found myself once more. And so, I sat in the stillness, feeling the weight of my gratitude settle over me like a warm blanket. I had survived, and more than that, I had thrived. I had chosen myself. I had healed, and I had found peace, and for that, I would be forever thankful. Forgiveness is one of the hardest things we can do for ourselves. We often think of forgiveness as something we offer to others, someone who has hurt us, betrayed us, or wronged us in some way. But I had learned that true healing begins when we offer that same forgiveness to ourselves. It was a lesson I had spent years avoiding, but finally, I was ready to learn it. For so long, I had carried the weight of my mistakes. I had replayed every choice I made, every wrong turn, every opportunity I had missed. I had been my harshest critic, holding myself to impossible standards, believing that I was not enough, that I had failed in ways I could never fix. I had carried the guilt of those decisions like a heavy stone around my neck, convinced that if I could just do things differently, I could erase the pain. But as the years passed, I began to realize that those mistakes, those missteps, were not signs of failure. They were simply part of being human. They were a part of my journey. And as I learned to forgive others, I began to see that I needed to extend that same grace to myself. I had made choices that I regretted. I had hurt people, including myself. But I had also learned, grown, and changed in ways I never could have imagined. I had survived every storm, every challenge, and I was still here. That, in itself, was something worth forgiving. It was a quiet moment, one of those rare moments of clarity, when I finally realized that I could let go of the past. I could forgive myself for the times I had been too hard on myself, for the moments I had doubted my worth, for the mistakes I had made. I could release the shame that had haunted me for so long and embrace the woman I had become. It was time to stop punishing myself for things that were beyond my control. Forgiveness, I realized, was not about forgetting. It was about accepting that I could not change the past, but I could change how I viewed it. I could choose to see my mistakes as opportunities for growth, not as failures. I could choose to see myself with compassion instead of judgment. And in doing so, I could finally find peace. The process of forgiveness was not instant. It did not happen in a single moment. It was a slow, gradual letting go. But as I began to forgive myself, I noticed something incredible happening inside me. The weight of guilt that had been crushing me for years began to lift. My heart felt lighter, and for the first time in a long time, I could breathe deeply, without the heaviness of regret holding me back. It was not easy, and there were still moments when I slipped into old habits, when the self-doubt crept back in. But I learned to recognize those moments and gently remind myself that I had done the best I could with what I knew at the time. I had acted with the knowledge and wisdom I had, and I had made decisions based on the woman I was in that moment. And now, I was someone different. A woman who had learned from those experiences. A woman who had grown stronger because of them. I forgave myself for not always being perfect, for not always having the answers, for not always making the right choices. I forgave myself for the times I had let fear hold me back, for the times I had doubted my own worth. And in doing so, I found a sense of freedom I had never known before. Forgiveness was not just a gift I gave to myself. It was a necessary step on my journey to healing. And as I forgave myself, I found that I was able to move forward with a new sense of peace and self-acceptance. I was no longer defined by my mistakes. I was no longer bound by my past. I was free to be the woman I had always been meant to be. And in that freedom, I found a quiet joy, one that came not from the approval of others, but from the simple knowledge that I had made peace with myself. There is a certain kind of freedom that comes when you release the burdens of the past. It is a freedom that cannot be bought or forced. It is a quiet, inner liberation, one that comes when you finally understand that you are not defined by your past, your mistakes, or the opinions of others. For so long, I had lived in the shadows of my own fears. I had carried the weight of guilt, regret, and self-doubt as if they were an essential part of who I was. I thought they were things I had to carry, that I could not move forward unless I first dealt with them. But now, I knew better. The truth was simple yet profound. I had already endured the worst of it. I had faced my darkest fears, lived through my most painful moments. And yet, I was still standing. And in standing, I had found my strength. I had found the power to let go. And so, I let go. I let go of the past that had haunted me, the people who had disappointed me, the dreams that had slipped through my fingers. I released the guilt that had been tied to every mistake, every failure. I stopped measuring myself against the expectations of others and the ideals I had once held so dearly. For the first time in my life, I was no longer bound by anything, by fear, by regret, by the need for approval. I was free to live, to make my own choices, to embrace who I was without shame or hesitation. I was free to be myself, not the woman others expected me to be, but the woman I had finally discovered within me. In that freedom, I felt alive. I felt the weight of the world lift from my shoulders, and for the first time in years, I could breathe deeply without the burden of past mistakes pressing against my chest. I was no longer afraid to take risks, to step into the unknown, to trust myself again. I had walked through the fire of my past and come out on the other side, not unscathed but stronger. The scars I carried were no longer signs of weakness. They were marks of resilience. They were the evidence of a life fully lived, of lessons learned the hard way, but lessons nonetheless. And I wore them with pride. The freedom I felt was not the kind that came from external circumstances. It was not about having everything I wanted or achieving some grand success. It was the freedom that came from within. Freedom from the chains of self-doubt, from the fear of judgment, from the need to be perfect. It was a freedom that allowed me to be gentle with myself, to be kind to myself, and to embrace the fact that I was enough, just as I was. I no longer needed to prove my worth to anyone, least of all myself. I had learned to love myself, flaws and all, and in that love, I had found my freedom. As I stood in the middle of my life, with the future stretching out before me, I felt a sense of excitement that I had not felt in years. The world was wide, open, full of possibilities I had once thought were beyond my reach. I had spent too much time waiting for permission to live, for someone else to give me the go-ahead. But now, I realized that I had always had the power to choose my own path, was free to make my own decisions. I was free to create my own happiness. I was free to let go of the past and step into a future that was mine to shape. And so, I smiled. Not because everything was perfect, but because I was no longer afraid. I was no longer held back by my own doubts. I was no longer weighed down by the past. I was free to be who I was meant to be. The road ahead was unknown, but for the first time in my life, that did not scare me. I was ready. I was free. There comes a time in life when you stop searching for answers from the outside world. You stop waiting for validation from others. You stop trying to fit yourself into boxes that were never meant for you. Instead, you turn inward and begin to understand the truth that has always been inside you, the truth of who you truly are. For so long, I had been on a journey to find myself. I had looked for answers in other people's opinions, in the expectations of society, and in the roles I thought I should play. I had been a daughter, a wife, a mother, and a grandmother. But somewhere along the way, I had forgotten the most important role of all. I had forgotten who I was, outside of what others needed me to be. But now, I finally knew. I knew who I was, and I knew that I was enough. I was not defined by my past, by my mistakes, or by the labels others had placed on me. I was not just a mother, or a grandmother, or a wife. I was not just a collection of roles or titles. I was a woman with my own story, my own experiences, and my own dreams. I was a woman who had learned, grown, and survived. I was a woman who had faced the darkest moments of her life and had come out the other side stronger, wiser, and more whole. I had spent so many years questioning my worth, wondering if I had made the right choices, if I had done enough. But now, I understood that my worth was never tied to the approval of others. It was never tied to how well I performed or how others saw me. My worth was inherent in who I was, just as I was. I had learned that true strength does not come from always being right or perfect. True strength comes from accepting your flaws, embracing your imperfections, and continuing to move forward despite the obstacles in your path. I had learned that it was okay to not have all the answers, to not have it all figured out. What mattered was that I kept going, that I kept learning, that I kept growing. As I looked back on the road I had traveled, I saw the woman I had been. She was lost, unsure, and searching. But I also saw the woman I had become, a woman who had found her way, a woman who had reclaimed her power, a woman who had finally found peace within herself. I was no longer afraid of who I was. I was no longer ashamed of my journey or my mistakes. I was no longer defined by the opinions of others. I knew who I was, and I was proud of that woman. I had earned every piece of my story, and I had learned that I was more than enough, just as I was. For the first time in my life, I truly felt at peace with myself. I had stopped searching for validation from others because I no longer needed it. I had stopped comparing myself to others because I knew that my journey was uniquely mine. And in that peace, I found a sense of freedom that I had never known. Before, I was not perfect. I did not have all the answers. But I had learned to accept myself, flaws and all. And that, I realized, was all that really mattered. I knew who I was, and that was enough. As I sit here reflecting on the journey I have walked, I realize that this story, my story, is not just mine. It belongs to every woman who has ever felt overlooked, undervalued, or uncertain. It belongs to anyone who has carried the weight of guilt, regret, or fear, and wondered if they would ever be free. It belongs to those who have struggled to find themselves, to see their own worth, and to embrace the truth of who they are. To you, the person listening, I want to say this. You are enough. You have always been enough. Life has a way of making us doubt ourselves. It has a way of convincing us that we need to be more, do more, or prove ourselves in ways that are not true to who we are. But the truth is simple. You do not need anyone's approval to be worthy of love, respect, and kindness. You do not need to be perfect to deserve peace, happiness, and freedom. I know what it feels like to carry the weight of expectations, both the ones placed on you by others and the ones you place on yourself. I know what it feels like to believe that you have to be everything for everyone, to give all of yourself away, and yet feel like you are never enough. But I also know what it feels like to finally step into your own power, to let go of the past, and to accept that you are deserving of all the love and joy life has to offer, just as you are. I have learned that forgiveness is not just for others, it is for yourself too. It is the key to healing, the key to releasing the pain of the past and moving forward with a heart full of hope and possibility. And as you forgive yourself, you begin to realize that you are not defined by your mistakes. You are defined by your resilience, your ability to grow, and your willingness to keep moving forward, no matter how difficult the road may seem. You are stronger than you think. You are braver than you know. You are worthy of every good thing that comes your way, and you deserve to live a life that is full of peace, joy, and love. So as you listen to my story, remember this: you are not alone. Your struggles, your pain, your doubts, they are part of the human experience. And just like me, you too can find your way through them. You too can discover your strength, your worth, and your true self. It may not be easy, and it may take time, but I promise you, it is worth it. Never forget that you are enough, just as you are. You have the power to create the life you want, to heal from the past, and to move forward with a heart full of hope. Thank you for being here with me, for listening, and for allowing my story to be a part of yours. I hope that, in some small way, it has reminded you of your own strength and the incredible person you are. And remember, no matter where you are on your journey, you are always worthy of love, happiness, and peace. You are enough,